This rook ending is part of the chessvideos.com series on fundamental endgame positions, and we had the Lucena position earlier in which we saw how the stronger side in these rook and pawn versus rook endings is able to win the game if the pawn can get far enough advanced and the king can get in front of the pawn. Now we're going to see how the weaker side, the side with only the rook and king, is able to draw, and this sort of fundamental position will highlight all the defensive ideas so that any sort of analogous rook ending you'll be able to play. This position is known as the Philidor position and was first analyzed and written about in 1777 by the French player Philidor. So as we're going to see, the main idea involves controlling the third rank, but first I want to show how more other ideas don't really work, such as the one that might make sense for a lot of players, which is activating the rook with rook h1. The idea would be that we can check the king from behind and prevent progress. Now, while this move does ultimately draw, it's rather complicated and makes things very hard for black, and we'll see why. After rook g7, check, king e8, and now king d6, black has a serious problem. The point is that if rook h6 check, e6 is going to cause major headaches for black. Mate is already threatened, the pawn is very far advanced, there's not time to drop the rook back, and this is just going to be a serious problem for black. So rook h6 doesn't work after king d6, and rook d1, now we can play king e6, and white has a lot of threats. I mean, we're going to threaten mate, we can force the black king away from the e file, in which case we'll be able to advance our king and advance the pawn. So as we can see, once white gets the king in front of the pawn, even in positions where it's still a draw with very accurate play by black, it's very difficult to hold because this enemy king is in front of the pawn and it's active and mating threats against the enemy king. So activating the rook in this position does not quite work. So we're going to see the main drawing idea, and one that leads to a very easy draw, is rook h6. The point is that we're not going to allow the enemy king to the third rank, rather we're going to force the pawn to advance. For example, after rook g7, king e8, rook a7, and we can see that after rook g6, black's plan is just to shuffle this rook back and forth. You know, white can throw in some checks, but it'll really lead to the same thing. I mean, here we can just bring our king up, and white doesn't really have any tries other than pushing. The king can't advance, so e6 is the only try for a win. But now we'll see why the idea of controlling the third rank was so critical after we activate the rook with rook g1. Now when the king can't shield itself from checks in front of the pawn because the pawn is too far advanced. So, for example, moves like checking don't work for the same reason before. It just doesn't really gain anything. So really the only try after rook g1 is rook back to a4. Well, he can try to move the rook with the idea of maybe shielding, but as we can see, after rook d1 check, or the move king e7, for example, white can't really make any progress. He needs to check the king back so that the king can advance. So really, these moves aren't going to work. The only try is to advance the king, and now we're threatening mate, but as we can see, rook d1 check forces the king, and as we can see, the active rook is just going to mercilessly check the enemy king back and forth, and there's really nothing white can do about this. It's just going to get white. He can't shield himself in front of the pawn, so the rook is going to be able to check forever. And the only other try maybe would be, after king d6 it's too late. So really the only other try would be rook a4. Alright, from this position, king d6 fails, so maybe something, rook a4, the idea is that we're going to try to block the check, but even that doesn't work. After this, it's just hopeless, and black can even try rook d1 check. So the point is that we force the enemy pawn to advance the third rank, and then we drop our rook back to g1, and the king can't shield itself from check. So rook h6, then we just shuffle our rook back and forth until e6, and then we activate the rook. The white king can't hide, and we'll just keep checking, and this is an easy draw for black. So from now on, the key is you want to force the enemy pawn up to the third rank by controlling the third rank with your rook so that the white king can't really shield itself. And that's all based on the central idea that we don't want to allow the white king in front of its pawn. So by studying this position, you'll know the main defensive technique for almost all king and rook endings, where it's king and rook against king and rook and a lone pawn. If you have any comments, feel free to post about it.